Boris Johnson needs a fool. Indeed, all prime ministers need one, and let's have no cheap cracks from those who suspect his problem is not an absence of fools but a surplus of them. Nor, God forbid, should we heed the sharp-tongued friend of mine who observed, all Johnson has to do if he's in search of a fool is look in the mirror. Most unfair.
And anyway, I'm talking about a special kind of fool, otherwise known as a court jester.
The last of them disappeared a few centuries ago, but they performed a valuable function apart from making the monarch laugh.
They told the king things that no one else would have dared mention, without risking an appointment with the executioner.
Will Summer was a famous jester at the court of Henry VIII. Historic England tells us one of his most pointed jokes went like this: "As please your grace, you have so many frauditers, and so many deceivers to get up your money that they get all to themselves." In modern language, the king was being royally ripped off. In modern times it's the taxpayer who gets ripped off all too often.
One example, the scandalous waste of money at the start of the pandemic when contracts worth many millions were awarded to companies for vital kits such as PPE even though they had virtually no experience of providing it. What they did have was the right contacts in high places.
Sometimes even ministers themselves admit they've been stupid. The Transport Secretary Grant Shapps did it the other day. He told a committee of MPs that smart motorways were anything but smart.
Death traps was the phrase used by a coroner recently. Just this week, Highways England was referred to prosecutors, and may face a corporate manslaughter charge after yet another death. Anyone who's ever driven on a motorway knows that hard shoulders are there for a reason. But the policy went through anyway.
What was lacking was a bit of that undervalued and often derided commodity, common sense. Another example, can you imagine anyone in this country being sentenced to jail for 10 years because they told officials at Heathrow they'd just come from Spain when they'd actually been in Portugal?
Of course you can't, even if Portugal is on the so-called red list of 33 countries where COVID may be a greater risk than it is here. 10 years for raping a child? Certainly. 10 years for failing to fill in a form? It will never happen, and everyone knows it will never happen. So why did Matt Hancock threaten it this week? Perhaps he really believed it would act as a deterrent to any would-be rule breaker. But deterrents work only if they are credible. This one isn't.
Common sense was jettisoned on Thursday too. The government announced it is reforming the NHS. Again. These reforms will reverse the last reforms of 10 years ago. Maybe they will work and maybe they won't, but one certainty is they will, once again, cause massive disruption.
Did anyone in Whitehall point out that we are in the middle of the greatest health crisis in living memory? I bet the over-rewarded management consultants didn't. They earned their considerable fees by peddling change. In the last reforms, a doctor friend, making polite conversation with one such consultant who was telling him how his hospital should be run, gently inquired which previous hospitals he'd worked in. "Oh, this is the first," he replied. "I was in a biscuit factory last month."
It's not that governments never get it right. We are reaping the benefits of a brilliant vaccination program, as I write. But let's remember it's the scientists and researchers who made it possible.